Okay, friends, this is a juicy topic. I like to say that we cannot control our external circumstances or what happens to us. But the one thing that we do have control of is our response to what happened. But the other day, someone asked me, what about when I don't feel like I am in control of my response to the situation? And it was such a good question that I decided, let's talk about this on the podcast today, because there are a lot of things in life that cause us stress. And sometimes when a situation happens, we feel overwhelmed by our thoughts and emotions, and we feel like we are just acting in a habit pattern and we have no control over what our brain is thinking about, what is going on in our body, and we feel like we don't have control over our response to the situation. So let's talk about what we do and how we can hack our brains and actually be in control of our response. Welcome to More Than a Milspouse, the podcast for military spouses who want to live with more meaning and less overwhelm. I'm your host, Christine, seasoned military spouse, mom of 3, life coach, and your guide to intentionally designing a life you're excited about as a military spouse. I'm here to help you get the clarity you need so you can get unstuck and unlock your purpose and potential. Because you, my friend, are more than a milspouse. You have something valuable to offer. And when you pursue the things that light your heart on fire, you trade frustration for fulfillment and isolation for a life of impact. It's time to discover who you are meant to be, because together we can change the world. Now, the one thing I want to say before we dive into this topic is that none of us are going to show up the way that we want to show up. None of us are going to respond the way we want to 100% of the time. We are all human, and as humans, we all make mistakes. So knowing what we can do doesn't mean that we will do it. But there are tools and tips that will help us be more in control of the way that we respond to life circumstances and things that get thrown our way. Sometimes it feels like our thoughts and emotions are dictating our response to the situation, and we don't have any control over that. But what is really causing that response is our brain's interpretation of what happened. And this happens very quickly. So that's why sometimes we can think that a response is automatic, but we can actually hack into our brain's interpretation so that we can control our response. So I want you to think about your circumstance, about what happens as the trigger. And the event itself, do not view that as necessarily negative or positive. It is simply neutral. It is what happens. It is your brain's interpretation of that makes it a negative or positive experience. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps of World War II, said the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances. And he went through some really awful circumstances. So how do we choose our attitude? How do we reinterpret what is happening when we feel overwhelmed by our circumstances? Our actions, our attitudes, and our emotions can all be traced back to our thought about what happened. And our brain is trying to assign a meaning to what happened. So at the end of the day, this all comes back to our thoughts. Now, we all have thoughts running through our head on a regular basis. And I want you to think of these thoughts as stories that your brain is telling you that may or may not be true. But the more that you resist the thoughts in your brain, the more you will struggle. And the more that we try to stop our brain from thinking, the louder our thoughts often get. Now, our thoughts matter because science tells us that we ultimately become what we tend to picture in our mind. So our goal is to not necessarily get rid of our thoughts about the situation, but to relate to our thoughts in a new way so that they have less impact and influence over us. Now, that can sound a little vague. What do you mean by relating to our thoughts in a new way? Okay, so what I want to do is give you a set of steps that you can walk through to help you change your relationship with your thoughts. Because we know that we all have thoughts. The thoughts are constant. They may or may not be true. And I want you to be able to hack your brain so that you can relate to the thoughts in a new way and ultimately choose a better response, to feel like you are in control of your response to the situation. So I'm going to give you 6 things you can do to put this into practice. Number 1 is to connect to the present moment. Sometimes things happen and we feel overwhelmed in that moment. But the first thing we can do to help ourselves step out from the situation, to step out from our feelings and emotions and thoughts, is to connect with the present moment. What is going on in this moment? How can I connect to myself and the world around me in this moment? Because so often our concern, our emotion, our feelings are based on things that happened in the past or that we're concerned about happening in the future. And the only thing that we actually have control of is what is happening in the present moment. So some easy ways to connect with your present moment is, number 1, to begin to regulate your emotions in your nervous system by taking some deep breaths. This is going to calm your body down and give you some space to choose a different response. So number 1 is deep breaths. Number 2 is noticing what's around you, looking around to focus on what you can see, what you can feel, what you can taste, touch, focusing on your senses around you. That is going to help you connect to the present moment. A third thing you can do is to check in with yourself. Notice what is going on in your body. Get really curious about what sensations you are feeling in the moment. And the fourth thing that you can do to really connect with the present moment is to go outside. There is a lot of research that talks about just being in nature. Even if you have a patch of grass and you can go out, stand outside barefoot for a few minutes, something that helps connect you with nature, or going and getting some sunlight of some kind, that can help you connect with the present moment. The second thing that you can do is to make space for your unwanted feelings and sensations. And I want you to think of this as you're surfing a wave, only you're surfing the wave of your emotions, because the emotion is going to increase, it's going to crest, and then it's going to begin to dissipate a little bit. And when you can begin to notice those feelings and emotions without judgment, then you are making space for those unwanted feelings and sensations. And another part to this is really approaching yourself with self-compassion, which is what we talked about in episode 188. I have that linked in the show notes, but it talks about how we approach what we do without judgment. We notice our feelings and emotions. We notice what we're doing because until we began to notice, we cannot change. The first step to being able to change our response, to be in control of our response, is to notice what is going on. So we can do that when we connect with the present moment, when we make room for our feelings and sensations. And number 3, when we create space from the thoughts in our head. So an easy way to do that is to, instead of having the thought in your brain, the thought that something happens, you made a mistake, and your first thought is, I'm a failure. To create space, instead, you say, I'm having the thought that. I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. I'm having the thought that this was a big mistake. I'm having the thought. And then to follow up with that, is this thought helpful? Is this thought helping me show up as the person I want to be? Is this thought helping me reach my goals? Is this thought helpful? We are creating space from our thoughts. And this pause allows us to make a different choice, to respond in a way that doesn't feel like something that we have no control over. We can choose to respond in a way that aligns with who we want to be. Now, this doesn't mean that we will always do that. Like I said earlier in the episode, sometimes we will still go back to these habit patterns, the ways that we have been responding over time, because we've developed those neural pathways in our brain that make that an easy choice. But it is possible to create new neural pathways because there is a space between the stimulus and our response. So we can do this by connecting to the present moment, making room for those sensations, and creating space from our thoughts. Now, I told you 6 things we can do. And the first 3 are really about what we do in that moment when we feel overwhelmed. These next 3 are really about how we set this up long term so that we are prepared when a situation happens that feels outside of our control, that we feel like we don't control our response. The 4th thing that we can do is to decide what we want to focus on. And this is so powerful when we feel stuck in a negative thought loop because we are deciding what we want to focus on rather than letting our thoughts run wild. Because when it comes to our brain, we can only consciously think of one thing at a time. And important to note that the more we think about, talk about, write about something happening, the more we improve the probability of that thing happening. So what we want to do is think about, talk about, write about what we want to have happen in our life. So when we have a situation, our brain is going to start creating a story about what happened. But We can hack that process when we decide what we want our thoughts to be about. What are you focusing your thoughts on? Because your brain can only consciously think about one thing at a time. Now, a lot of this gets into, we start feeling like, okay, I'm going to go distract myself with something else, which works to a point, but if you are not consciously thinking about something, then that negative thought loop is going to start playing again. So you have to be very intentional about what you want to think about. The fifth thing that we can do to control our response is to spend time visualizing and rehearsing what we want to have happen. And I don't have time to go into all of the science behind this, but this has to do with our brain creating those neural pathways that we want and how our conscious mind and our subconscious mind work together to build the neural pathways in our brain. So the more that we spend time visualizing and mentally rehearsing what we want to have happen, the more we actually increase the likelihood of that happening. So if you want to respond in a certain way, if you want to be able to show up in a certain way, if you want to be able to not yell at your kids when you get triggered, then you have to spend time visualizing and rehearsing that in your mind. How will I act when this situation occurs? How will I respond in this moment? Spend your time visualizing in your mind and rehearsing what you want to have happen. And then lastly, take actions that align with who you want to be. Is this how I want to show up? Is this how I want to respond? Is this how I want to be seen by others? Take actions that align with who you want to be. When I get in this situation, when this situation occurs, how do I want to respond? Now, 3 things to note. Number 1, don't wait until you are in a challenging situation to begin learning these skills. You can begin learning and practicing connecting with the present moment, making room for your thoughts and feelings and sensations, creating space from your thoughts, deciding what you want to focus on, what you want to visualize and rehearse, and taking actions that align with who you want to be before you ever get put in a situation. The second thing to note is that so much of this comes back to mindfulness. And the more that we practice tools of mindfulness, the better prepared we are to deal with challenging situations. And there are several episodes on the podcast about mindfulness and how we incorporate mindfulness and mind management into our daily lives. I will just give you one tool that will help you with all of this right now, and that is to start a daily check-in practice. It doesn't have to be long, but even just taking a minute or 5 minutes every day just to check in with your body and to begin to notice where you feel your sensations in your body and what that feels like. Are there areas of expansion, of peace in your body? Are there areas of tension and tightness? Just spend a couple of minutes every day checking in and noticing what is going on in your body. And when you do something simple like that, that will help you in the long run be able to navigate difficult situations. And then the third thing to note is that so much of this depends on knowing how you want to show up and what is important and meaningful to you. Now, if you have never taken the time to figure out, hey, how do I want to respond? How do I want to show up? The best place I suggest that you get started is by downloading our free values worksheet. You can find that linked in the show notes or by going to the resources page on our website. But if you will download that worksheet and answer those questions, that will help you begin to get clear on what is important to you and what values do you want to show up in your everyday life that inform how you respond to these situations. And then just to reiterate what has already been said, we're not going to always do this well. We're going to make mistakes. And I really like how Dr. Nicole LePera puts this in her book, How to Be the Love You Seek. And she's talking about responding to our circumstances and about taking that time to pause so that we're not reacting in the moment, but intentionally responding to what happens. And she writes, pausing doesn't always prevent me from doing what I feel compelled or habituated to do, but it does give me the opportunity to make a different decision. So yes, there are opportunities and events and circumstances that feel overwhelming, where we feel like we are unable to control our response. And even when we do all the right things, sometimes we're still going to make a choice that our body has been habituated and conditioned to do. But these practices will help us pause, create space, and make a better choice. We can respond rather than react. And these tools will help you do just that. I would love for you to come tell me your thoughts on this episode. Come join us inside our Facebook community and let's encourage and empower each other, because life as a military spouse is often challenging. There are lots of circumstances outside of our control and lots of opportunities for us to put these tools into practice. So if you are navigating a challenging situation and you need some support, please reach out. Click on the Work With Me link in the show notes or on our website, milspousemastermind.com. Until next time, may you live filled, fueled, and full of joy. Hey, amazing milspouse, before you go, I want you to know that I love hearing from you. The More Than a Milspouse community exists to help you thrive as a military spouse. Figure out what lights your heart on fire and empower you to live with purpose and impact. You can have an incredible impact simply by heading over to iTunes to subscribe and leave a review. But your impact doesn't stop there. You can empower those around you simply by sharing an episode with a friend or neighbor, someone who needs a little encouragement in this military life. And if this episode was meaningful to you, spread the love by taking a screenshot of this episode and tagging me on Instagram so we can continue to reach more people, change more lives, and shift the way that military spouses look at life. Because we are better together. Together, we can change the world. Let's do it.